In order to win on the road, Washington needs to slow down Maryland's freshman sensation at quarterback.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. And just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you're getting this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that might be, make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you don't miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the program out a lot. Now, Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. We're going to talk about some of the positive returns on the recruiting trail that we've already seen from this Ohio State game, and all of the recruits, like seriously, like 50 plus that were on campus. We'll get to that in a little bit. We want to talk about Washington getting pressure on Malik Washington and this Maryland offense. But first, speaking of Malik Washington, he has been really impressive to start the season. Maryland's 4-0. They've received more votes than Washington in the coaches poll, and with or without Tacario Davis, stopping him is the number one key to a successful day from this UW defense.
Yeah, it's really interesting when I see the completion percentage be 59.6. I want to say it's sub 60. I know that for sure. That to me is like, oh, okay, freshman, sub 60 completion percentage. Maybe he's not that good. And then you go turn on the tape and it's, oh, okay, he's actually, first of all, you can't miss him. Like you said, big body, not necessarily Jamarcus Russell big, but you just know it's kind of almost close. It reminds me a little
Ryan Walters copped him to Cam Newton during his press conference today.
Yeah, and again, that's a big praise there. But again, you just think about the body size and why was Cam so hard to bring down? Because he, A, was big, but also B, could use his body the correct way. And I think that's going to be interesting because when you look at Washington's ability to pressure, if you're concerned about the edges, you're just trying to kind of force him up into the pocket to get back to the middle of the defense. That's where the strength of UW's defense is right now, in the in kind of that interior, so to speak, and Jacob Lane on the outside. Which makes me curious, how does Washington game plan for that? Because the one strength that you do have is the weakness, and that's Maryland's wide receivers. He's got 14 drop passes credited. That's not batted balls. That's not throwaways. That's just the receiver straight up dropping the ball. Damon Williams has 12 sacks. That's the offensive line issue. If those issues were flipped, I would take Washington every day and twice on Sunday. But that's kind of where the intrigue kind of lies for me.
So I like where you're going with that. I want to just dive into a couple of those other numbers where you mentioned the completion percentage. That's the second lowest in the Big Ten. Only Michigan has completed a lower percentage of their passes, but Malik Washington has also thrown the fourth most passes, where Maryland as a team has had 146 attempts. Interestingly enough, Washington is last, which is 96. But I look at this offense, and it's always clear that Mike Locksley and this Maryland team, they're going to want to throw the ball. They're going to do it a lot. So I'm curious there because with or without Tacario Davis, we know Rashawn Clark is going to be back for this game. I think that Washington has the bodies on the outside. I think Ephesians Prysock has done a really nice job taking a big step forward this year. We got to speak with Dylan Robinson on Tuesday, who talked about just how much he has learned in just a few months of being on campus with a college football program and everything that's come along. And it's something where when you talk to people around the program, you go back and you watch how he played against Washington State, how he played against Ohio State. This coaching staff was thrilled with his performance in both those games and said he didn't make a lot of mental mistakes. I think Ryan Walters said he didn't make any after going back and looking at the film against Ohio State, which is incredibly impressive for, what that caliber of receiver is across from him. And just everything that comes along with the fact that he already has a turnover credited with a forced fumble that he had against Washington State. You know that he can be a big physical presence for you on the outside in the run game and come down and fill some of those holes. But at the same point, with whatever Ryan Walters is going to want to throw at this Maryland team where, you talk about the drops. I think it's something to mention that the way Ryan Walters wants to run his defense is with a lot of press man on the outside. And if these receivers are going to be, making just the same amount of mental mistakes and making drops in this game, you're going to challenge them to beat you one-on-one on the outside with or without Tacario Davis at this point. I feel like, because that's just how confident this coaching staff seems to be in Dylan Robinson, and then adding a guy like Rashawn Clark back into the nickel as he continues to get his feet under him and just get more reps. I'm very excited about what he can bring to the table. We saw what his ceiling looks like during spring practice as a guy who can generate turnovers every single day. So I think that Washington's secondary is really coming along nicely. And, you look at just the overall passing yardage numbers. Maryland ranks 6th in the conference, averaging 265.8 yards per game. And Washington is 10th in passing yards allowed at 202.3. And you can look at that and say, the way that they struggled in the secondary against Washington State is certainly a big part of this. No, you can't take that out. But I just think that it's something where as UW continues to find what works for them on the outside, especially with Tacario Davis still, questionable for this game, I feel confident about what Washington secondary can bring to the table in this matchup.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think the thing about Rashawn Clark that I love that you hit on was, where did Ohio State really eat against Washington's defense when it came to the pass game? It was over the middle crossing routes. That, you think about Jeremiah Smith's first touchdown, nobody came to follow him, whether it was Leroy or Dylan, whoever you want to credit on that play. Somebody should have followed Jeremiah across the middle, and then he skirts for the touchdown. That's without saying. But with Rashawn there, he's been that glue guy in terms of he really sticks to guys. That's not going to be a problem this weekend against Maryland. And so that's where, when you talk about if Tacario doesn't play, whether it's Leroy or Rashawn maybe on the outside, I think Rashawn really does kind of seem to fit best at nickel for the time being.
I think he stays in the nickel.
And that's kind of the crux of the issue, where is, can you now kick Leroy back outside, where we talked about in fall camp, he made the move inside. And it's like, if you're Leroy, it's like, great, you guys are asking me to do two different things here, but well, that means the coaching staff thinks that highly of you to where you can do that. And also Leroy has the physical traits to do that. But if it's not Leroy, it's probably going to be Dylan Robinson more likely than not. And that, I think, is why I'm kind of more confident, if that makes sense, because of as you mentioned, Dylan's proven himself twice now against Washington State and Ohio State. When you throw Maryland into that mix, Maryland is probably better than Wazoo, not Ohio State certainly. But I think between those two, Dylan more than proved he can hold up. It's just a matter of, can you get Malik Washington off structure but not scrambling? Because that's also where we've seen Washington struggle at least a little bit, maybe not as much sort of last season, but in that Malik can run. He's got a big body, so they might, if you're, let's say it's 3rd and 4, and you get him off structure, well, he only needs 4 or 5 yards to move the chains. That's different than if you're talking 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, which really means that Ryan Walters has to focus in on 1st and 2nd down and making sure that you're keeping them within that 3 to 5 yard range, so that 3rd down is actually more than just a couple of hands here.
So I want to go back and talk about something you mentioned with Leroy Bryant, where one thing that Dylan Robinson mentioned during his press conference on Tuesday was that he's just the whole next man up thing, and you're one injury away from becoming a starter. I think he's unseated Leroy Bryant at this point. I think the fact that he held up as well as he did against Ohio State is somewhat telling. And then, of course, to throw him out there in a press conference as a true freshman is also something that, I feel like can go under the radar a little bit from some people who might not necessarily pay attention to these things. But it just shows how much this coaching staff believes in him as a future part of this program. And it's something that you and I have talked about a lot. Even though he arrived in June, it was something where no matter what the case is, with Fisch and Tacario Davis using their final years of eligibility this season, he's going to be a starter next year, like no matter what. So throwing him into the fire as much as possible now, and especially doing that against a team like Ohio State, is so telling about his future. And it's something where I think, Mike Locksley and Malik Washington, Maryland might say, oh, hey, for Malik, I'm inexperienced as well, but he's got less experience than I do on the other side of the field. So if this is a game where he does need to start again and he gets 4, 5, 6 targets early on in the game, I'm not necessarily going to be shocked, but also the way he has lived up to the challenge so far with his size, his strength, his physicality, just jamming guys to the line of scrimmage. And again, holding up the way that he did against Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate is so telling of what his future can be. And it's really exciting to think about, because in a world where, let's say Tacario Davis is out, I'm going to say 2 more weeks. This is just speculation. There's nothing more than that, because you got a short week following that against Rutgers. I feel confident in what Dylan brings to the table, and I think this coaching staff does as well, which is a great sign just for the future of this position, where you're losing so many guys to eligibility at the end of this year, but also just for a kid like that, if this is his floor, and this is where he is as a true freshman right now, his ceiling is through the roof, and this could be a game where he has an opportunity to show that off. But Lars, this also poses the question because we know Washington has the bodies to hold up on the back end. Can they get pressure on Malik Washington? And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than anyone else as of August 2025. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details. Mazda brings the same attention to how we craft every model. You can feel Japanese craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Napa leather upholstery. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. Like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. We've also got a message from our good friends over at Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Some of the amazing things with Monarch is you can identify that you aren't saving as much as you thought. Monarch helps you notice an inefficient investment allocation and discover forgotten 401ks from past jobs. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONCollege. As we look at this battle in the trenches, this is where games in the Big Ten are won and lost. Maryland hasn't necessarily, in a very UW pre-Ohio State sort of mold, they haven't played the stiffest competition. Yes, they have a Big Ten win on the road at Wisconsin under their belts. I'm not impressed with that Wisconsin team at all so far at this point in the year. But Maryland's offensive line has only allowed 2 sacks. Washington has tallied 9 sacks this year. Solid number, middle of the road in the Big Ten this year. I look at this game, and especially if Zach Durfee can't go, this is the biggest question that I have, because like we were talking about a few minutes ago, Ryan Walters compared Malik Washington to Cam Newton in terms of size and stature and how hard he is to bring down. And this is one of those games where you look at this rotation in the middle of the offensive line, in the defensive line, no, they didn't get a ton of pressure against Ohio State, but also that was the measuring stick of that's the number 1 team in the country. No disrespect to Maryland, you're not. Like I said, they're a couple spots above you in terms of votes gotten in the coaches poll. So clearly they're starting to gain some momentum. It certainly is a team that is on the up and up this season. But I look at this, especially on the interior, this rotation of experienced bodies that Washington can put out there with Ontario Thompson, who I've been really impressed with this season. Tacario Davis, who had a really solid day against Ohio State. Bryce Butler is another guy who I'm really excited about. Olinius Davis continues to come along. Logan Sagapolu, Samoa Pepa, all these guys, if you can collapse the pocket a little bit and just put some pressure on them and force some bad throws, like you were talking about with completion percentage and different things, if you can find different ways to just throw them off structure, I'm a little more confident in what that could look like outside the pocket and trying to, make plays versus a Julian Sayin who was very good about, if this read's not there, if that read's not there, I'm going to get out of the pocket and make a move for the sticks. And I think Malik Washington can certainly do that. But I think that, it's a little bit different with just, and this is, I don't think I'm saying anything groundbreaking here, but with Ohio State's coaching staff versus Maryland's, I think that Julian Sayin is just a little further along in that department.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I mean, that goes without saying. No slight to Mike Locksley, but just, like you coached under Saban, you weren't Saban. But yeah, with that being said, the interesting thing with all that kind of being stated now, when you look at their rushing attack, here's where you can kind of pin your ears back is if you have a balanced offense, you have to counter the run. You have to be able to, manage that, which is Washington's kind of weakness, if you want to call it that. Who do you think leads Maryland in rushing touchdowns this season?
Malik Washington. I'm assuming that's where you're going with this.
Yeah. Malik Washington leads Maryland with 2 rushing touchdowns. 2. So,
like I said, pass first offense.
Exactly. Yeah. But that's why it's so important that it kind of gets stated, because you don't have that threat of the run game. And Malik Washington only has, I think, 80 yards total rushing, over the first 4 games. So for me, it's you kind of already get to pin your ears back in a sense. And this is where I look at an X-Ray Alexander, Jacob Lane obviously gets thrown into this mix as well. But where does the pressure come from? Because as we were talking a little bit about the secondary and maybe bringing some pressure from those guys, I'm not thinking Alex McLaughlin. I'm thinking RDA. Why not just send your freshman missile every now and then and see what happens? And, we both know RDA is going to do that. He would love to sign up for that task. And so I think there's a number of ways you can keep him not just off structure, but just kind of unsettled.
So I like where you're going with this because Ryland Dillard-Allen, it feels like we're going to see a lot more of him. One thing that Jedd Fisch mentioned during his Monday press conference is that we're not going to see CJ Christian, the Florida international transfer, for another couple of weeks as he deals with a turf toe injury. So we're going to see more Ryland Dillard-Allen. And the coaching staff is also obviously very happy with where he is. He played 43 snaps against Ohio State. Like, he was out there a lot. And yeah, he's still a little bit undersized, as Ryan Walters pointed out, but the speed, the physicality that he plays with at that size are incredibly exciting. And you're right. Like, that's certainly a way you could go. I look at this front seven and I don't think that's always necessary. And it's not to, shoot down your point, because these are all things that are very possible. I think they liked him a little bit in that nickel role where Alex McLaughlin's been playing in the box, and then McAllister was over the top. There are a bunch of different things that you can do when you put these three safeties on the field. I just think the pressure needs to come from the front, because it's not just in a game like this. It's just with the way this defense is structured, you're already sending blitzes on, I would say, more than 50% of your plays when you're throwing that 5-man front out there. So it's a matter of, you need to find a way to get those guys to hit home, whether it be Antario Thompson, whether it be a Bryce Butler or a Taitayo Uiagalelei, who guys, and these are guys we've seen disrupt the pocket and get into the backfield. I just think that that's a little bit more important. And then a guy who we haven't thrown out there yet that I think it's going to be interesting to monitor, we talked about him on yesterday's show, as the Everdeers know, is Jacob Manu. And what a guy like that does for the rest of this defense. Because if you talk about somebody who you might want to, play in a spy sort of role on Malik Washington, or just walk downhill and be an extra blitzer at times to just really put some pressure on this freshman quarterback, that's the guy I would look at, because he just has the most experience in the room. And it's very clear that, when you talk to Ryan Walters, when you talk to Jedd Fisch, Brian Odom, whoever it is, and you bring up his name, the number one thing they're going to tell you is he's really smart. He's got a lot of experience under his belt. So we trust him to make the right play. And I think having him back, especially with Buda Alukta now out for the season, he is the kind of guy who can fill that void in the middle as the, veteran with a lot of experience at the power 4 level.
Yeah, and it's why, if not for that ACL injury, he would have been your probably day one starter. And that's no disrespect to Tariq. I just think, you look at, certainly, obviously, with Devin being next to him, that he would have filled that spot without question. But I think, just like you mentioned, the veteran presence in that, and also the ability to read and understand offenses. Like, he's been around the block a couple times now. He's been with Johnny Hanson. I think he had one other defensive coordinator in his time before he came to Washington, and now being with Ryan Walters, we can see that the linebacker position, like, Ryan Walters doesn't get enough credit. And I don't know how much of it goes to Brian Odom, as you mentioned, or Ryan, but with the kind of the combination of those two, like, the linebackers seem to be getting unlocked this season, where you talk about, Devin Bryant getting, emerging this season as the team's leading tackler at one point. And I think that is why, if you put Jacob Manu in that role, it gets even better ROI, return on investment. That to me is where I could absolutely see him being a spy. You might think that wouldn't be the best situation, given he's 5'11",
sure,
2 something.
He's just such a physical guy.
Exactly, and I think you feel him more, and he knows how to play with the body that he has. Whereas if you have that size as a freshman, I am way less, confident in his ability to do that.
So one more thing that I think we should just talk about in that same vein before I move on here is, I love the point you're making about unlocking these linebackers. And, if Zach Durfee's out for a while, X-Ray Alexander is one of the guys who was thrown out there as someone who could potentially move to an outside linebacker role. And I'm curious to see if that might be just a slightly better fit for him with Jacob Manu now back on the field, with Jedd Fisch stating that Zadris Reyna-Saleh is going to practice full contact, full go this week for, I think, the first time this entire season, coming off an ACL tear that he suffered last year. I've been so impressed with the added physicality that both Jacob Manu and X-Ray Alexander added to this room. And I asked Ryan Walters about that on Tuesday in relation to Jacob Manu, and he was just it was very clear that he was so happy to have a guy like that back in the middle of the defense because of not just the veteran presence, but what he brings in a just downhill run support sort of role. And that's something that certainly could transition to, playing a spy role against Malik Washington. Just also, I think the fact that sometimes when you're a little bit smaller like that, you can get lost behind the line. It's something that people talk about with quarterbacks very often, Malik being 6'5", not something he has an issue with, but if he wants to play that spiral and walk down a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage, all of a sudden he's the kind of body that can get lost in a shuffle as, a pocket might start to break down or as it holds up even, because you can just kind of mask yourself behind an opposing defensive lineman and still look up and see where the quarterback is at all times. I think these are things that if he does want to roll out right or roll out left, Jacob, even, less than a year removed from this ACL tear, showed a tremendous amount of athleticism against Ohio State to just hold up in these plays and not, look a step behind or look a step slow, which I think is a really important part of this, because as the season goes on, it's very clear that, again, this is a conversation we had yesterday. You can't redshirt a guy like that right now with how the room looks. So you're going to ask a lot of him, especially, as the injuries just have continued to pile up, which has been really unfortunate. But that's the kind of guy who can be a game changer week in and week out because of everything he brings to the table, which is really, really exciting. But Lars, we got to switch gears here and we got to talk about the next generation of game changers because there are some really positive things rolling in from the Ohio State recruiting weekends. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love FanDuel because it gives you so many different ways to play. I built parlays, tried player props, and even followed the live lines during the games. And if you want to do something out there like, bet on the Mariners to come out of the American League and reach the World Series, you can do stuff like that too. And it makes watching football even more exciting too when you've got a little something riding on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. We've also got a message from our good friends over at Square because this episode is brought to you by Square and your favorite neighborhood spots run on Square. There are certain businesses that make the neighborhood the neighborhood. These are the places that become an extension of home. Whether it's the sports bar dedicated to your team's fan base, the spot with the best wings in town for game day, or that beloved local chain that's been rooted in your community for years, these businesses are what bring people together. When neighborhood businesses thrive, the whole neighborhood thrives. And it's so great to spend money at some of these places because when we show up as a community, it can mean big business for local business owners, and money spent in the neighborhood stays in the neighborhood. So you can take this ad as an excuse to go support your favorite local spot and have yourself a day in the neighborhood. Square is a proud partner of more than 4 million neighborhood businesses around the world. You can go to square.com/go/lockdowncollege to learn more. But before you do, go support your favorite neighborhood spot. You'll be happy you did. Square, see you in the neighborhood. There are so many guys that were on campus that you and I, our good buddies, Nick Lemkow, Alex Katzen, Scott Eklund, we're all pointing out on the sideline saying, oh, yeah, this guy's here. Oh, that guy's here. I know at one point, Alex and I were standing next to a 2028 five-star tight end, Titan McNeil. There's so many just offensive linemen, defensive linemen on campus. And that's where I want to go because one name we haven't talked about yet on this show who I've been really intrigued by as, we learned he was coming, got a chance to watch the film and just really dive into his backstory is Jon Ioane from Tustin High School down in Southern California. This kid is so much fun to watch where the best way to compare him, and it's not a, hey, this is what he moves like sort of thing, is Vita Vea because Lars, Jon Ioane, not only does he play defensive line and offensive line, he also plays quarterback at his high school at 290 pounds, which is just so much fun to watch. And that's something where, goes without saying that he has a really high football IQ. And, you can go read the report from Brandon Huffman. Washington has put themselves in a really strong position for his services following this weekend. And that's something that rings true for a lot of these defensive linemen. There's another one I want to talk about here in a few minutes, but this is the kind of guy where we talked about this on our reaction show, on our Monday show, the gap between Ohio State and Washington, it's clear there still is one, but it's not quite as big. And UW did such a great job holding up in the trenches in this game where you can show that to all these high school recruits, especially the one in the 27 class and say, over the next couple of years, we are graduating 11 defensive linemen, which means a major, overhaul and upgrade in this room is needed moving forward. And I think that Jon is one of the guys that really got that message.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, let's just for 30 seconds here unpack that whole quarterback thing. Like that is
crazy, right?
That's awesome. But the reason why it's awesome is because he's willing to do anything. Like, shows he's a good teammate, shows a good character guy that you want in your program. And also, B, he's confident in his abilities. Like that's a guy where you could, if you have that size, that's one thing. But you're probably not going to be good at throwing the ball. Like I've never seen a defensive lineman. You never. When we're out of practice and, kind of watching pregame stuff, you never see them doing that bounce trick. You always see the kickers doing it and maybe a quarterback or receiver here and there. But to have, that body and be able to do a number of different things like that, I mean, you're not just back there to be a bulldozer. You're back there actually at least executing the offense in some manner or form. And that's a guy, especially when you say from the state of California and Southern California more specifically, those are the guys that Washington can't afford to lose out on, and certainly to go to the Ohio State, the Michigans, the Alabamas, wherever you want to say, those schools that have been coming.
Notre Dame's a big player in this one from what it looks like.
And certainly Notre Dame, because we, the number of those battles over the years, Jack Lamb comes to mind, and there's a few guys that come to mind in that one. But that's an example of, we talk about, can't miss guys, and it's hard to really say this early on that he's a can't miss guy. But given the location, the proximity, and the need for defensive linemen moving forward, it's hard to say he's not.
So one thing I want to mention, because just reading up on Tustin High School is really, really fun right now, because you mentioned he's not back there to be a battering ram and he's back there to run the offense. Another who I believe was also on campus with him, that one was one I couldn't get confirmed. His teammate, Jeremiah Williams, who also plays defensive tackle with him at 315 pounds, is back there to be a battering ram at running back. So really interesting just pairing going on down there. But I want to stick on the defensive line here, because one guy who has done interviews with Adam Gorney, with Brandon Huffman so far, and said that Washington has moved into just the favorite category for him, or just among like the top schools for him right now, is 4-star edge rusher Troy Bowens. And this is a guy who I've been really intrigued by. You go and you read the numbers. He had 13 and a half sacks, 19 tackles for loss during his sophomore year. And the breakout season has happened. And he's a really good athlete. He's also got, the national just offer starting to roll in for him. He is somebody who I think fits really well in this Ryan Walters defense, where he's 6'4", 250, and his primary recruiter right now is Aaron Van Horn. So it probably is mainly an outside linebacker role. But with the size and versatility he brings to the table, I think he could play a 5 tech if he needed him to, and just be one of those versatile pieces that moves all over that we thought Taitaui might do a little bit more of in this defense. But it's just one of those things where at the same point, you just need to get more of these bodies into the room. And if you could pair him with a Jon Ioane, got a couple of guys who I just need to make sure that we mention by name, Miles Smith, Elijah Harmon, just guys in that light. And then, of course, Tavita Nonu being the number 1 in-state prospect. If you can pair Troy with a couple of those guys, all of a sudden that talent reload that you need on the defensive line, that is a major step forward.
Yeah, I mean, Troy's been a guy for me where the more you read up on him, the more you hear him talk about the schools that he's considering, Washington seems to be that school for him. And now that he's saying that they're like the leader or one of those schools that are very high up there, it's basically saying, hey, like I'm kind of leaning towards committing to Washington. I just want to check a few more boxes here and make sure it's all good to go. That is a guy you can't miss on. That's why I kind of wanted to reserve that one, not for Jon per se, but for Troy, because when you look at the production, it reminds me a lot of Braylon Trice, but a more polished version. I think coming out
bigger version too. Yeah, I agree.
Certainly. And I think that's why you can't miss on that type of guy, where he's already been up a couple of times. Now he's come up for a game day visit for Ohio State. And even after a loss is still saying, hey, by the way, despite the result of the visit was actually better. And so, because I saw a number of people saying on Twitter and asking, hey, is this a good result? Or is this a good kind of thing for recruiting given how the game went? I know it sounds a little crazy to say yes, but from the atmosphere, from everything, and again, score wasn't like 45-10. It wasn't a blowout. It wasn't like that. And I know there's a certain fan base down south that seems to think otherwise, but that's because they're down south. With all that being said, I think Troy is a guy where if you can get him early on, almost like the Reese Russell on the offensive line situation, where if you can get that guy in early, then you can really start to build that out. And I think they are starting to have a more likely than not chance that they will.
So I want to talk about a different offensive lineman, because one guy who it wasn't confirmed that he was going to come up here, but it came up alongside his teammate Noah Roberts, the coveted running back from Basha High School, is DaJohn Yarborough. And this is a guy who we got a chance to talk to John Mills on Tuesday. I think of in that same light where he's got the size and the physicality to come in and play a big role right away if need be. And I look at Noah Roberts, and Washington made a big move for him over the weekend, apparently, which is really nice to see, because that's a dude who is getting like Bijan Robinson comps and is the best back to come out of the state since then. And everyone's really impressed with him. And so making as much headway there as possible is important. And I just wanted to point that out, because the trenches are still certainly where you win and lose games in the Big Ten. And getting a guy like DaJohn in the boat, especially when, one of the things that just really stood out to me when we talked to John Mills is that he came in at 6'6" and 365 pounds. Just absolutely mind blowing for a kid who doesn't turn 18 until October 16th, by the way. But somebody with that size and that physicality right off the bat, you can find a way to plug him in if need be. But with the way Washington has recruited along the offensive line, if that's the kind of guy that you can get into the program and then have waiting in the wings, a lot like Chantalea is right now, that is the definition of stacking classes on the offensive line, the way that you and I have been talking about this program doing since Jedd Fisch got here. And just adding a guy like that is so exciting to think about, because you're starting to just have that tackle depth that you're looking for in this 25 class. And if you can just continue to grow that at just all over the line as well, with 26, with 2027, you're on the verge of building what you need to just have to succeed and win in the Big Ten every year.
All great points. And I think the only thing I would add on to that, you have DeMond for at least one more year. At least. Strike while the iron's hot. Like, anytime you can get a Basha guy, go get a Basha guy, because we saw a number of those guys, both for Ohio State and Washington, show out in this past weekend's game. That is the key here, because you have all those inroads and those relationships. And I'm not saying it's solely on DeMond, but Jedd has recruited the state of Arizona pretty much better than any coach that I can think of. And the tie into this is the Chris Peterson classes towards the end, when you got Roger Rosengarten and the 2020 class, you're stacking classes on top of those guys. That's the level that you're getting back to. And I think I think Jedd's already there, honestly. If you can get that in 26 and then continue that in 27, you are more than set moving forward in the Big Ten.
No, I absolutely agree with you there. One thing to note with DaJohn Yarborough is he's not a Basha guy through and through. Is he actually just transferred there from somewhere in Minneapolis? I can't remember the high school off the top of my head, but it's still the point still holds true that Basha has some of the top players in the 27 class. And like you said, you can strike while the iron's hot, because a lot of these guys probably still do have some kind of relationship with DeMond Williams, and selling that can be very, very important. But Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thanks to all everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the season. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel to new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell, so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please, if it's a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.